Chapter 1. The Door in the Woods. The wind scraped against the crumbling stone walls of the old cottage like a whisper dragged over broken glass. Autumn had come early to the village of Grazini, curling its skeletal fingers around the forested hills and hollowing out the bones of the air. Rain fell in slow, deliberate drizzles, less like water and more like the sky weeping molasses. Nothing here was fast. Nothing had been fast since 1945. Inside the dim cottage, the only light came from a single oil lamp sputtering on the warped kitchen table. The flame flickered, casting shadows that jittered across the peeling wallpaper, revealing the outlines of long-forgotten memories trapped in the faded decor. A crooked crucifix hung on the wall, blackened by smoke and time. Jakob Nowak sat hunched in his chair like a gargoyle, a woolen blanket draped over his shoulders, as thin and brittle as the man himself. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the drawer of the sideboard, an old groaning thing of rotted pine, and withdrew a tattered leather-bound book. The journal smelled of mildew and dust. The ink on the edges faded to the color of old blood. His fingers paused on the cover, trembling, not with age this time, but memory. He hadn't opened it in decades. The first page was blank, but the second carried a stain, a brownish blotch shaped like a fingerprint. Marek's fingerprint. Jakob had never washed it away. Couldn't, wouldn't. He pressed 2 fingers against it now, gently, reverently, like a man touching a grave. Outside, the wind moaned louder, low and long, like something ancient stirring in its sleep. He took a long breath. "Forgive me," he whispered to no one in particular. Then he began to write. Grazini, 1951. The war had ended, but the bones of it never left us. They lay beneath every inch of the land like a second skeleton, just under the skin. My father called it the rot that stays in the soil. And our village, our little string of homes straddling the road and half swallowed by the forest, sat right beside one of the worst scars. The munitions factory. It was built by the Germans in '42, operated by the SS and rumored to house more than just explosives. They said prisoners worked down in the lower levels, men who came in shackled and never came out again. The locals kept their distance even during the war. After the collapse of the Reich, the Soviets tried to dynamite the place, but the door, the thick, grotesque steel door, deep in the belly of the factory, wouldn't budge. 12 keys were found nearby, hanging on rusted pegs driven into the wall like nails into a coffin. No one knew what they opened. No one wanted to know. But kids are curious. Jakob paused. His eyes stared through the page and beyond, back to that humid August afternoon when they'd first found the factory. Back when Marek still laughed like a boy, not a ghost in his head. He ran a hand through what remained of his hair, then forced the pen back to paper. Even then, before we ever touched the keys, there was something wrong with the air around the place. It didn't feel still. It felt held, like someone was squeezing the wind and letting it out slowly with cruel fingers. Villagers began to vanish. Not all at once. One every few months, a hunter here, a traveler passing through. Then Father Olszewski, his church shoes left by the roadside, his rosary laid neatly across them like a funeral offering. No body, no footprints. And at night, the factory hummed. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't electricity or gas or anything you could name. It was like a voice just beyond hearing, humming the bones inside your ears, a lullaby made for worms and corpses. Every time I passed it on the way to the creek, I walked faster. I started to dream of that sound, like it was breathing inside my skull. The adults didn't speak of it, not directly, but they avoided the woods. They whispered when they thought we couldn't hear. The factory still remembers. It's appropriate behavior. It needs feeding. The door is waking. Jakob set the pen down and pressed his thumb and forefinger into his eyes until flashes of red danced against his vision. His chest felt tight, not from age or illness, but from the weight of that long dead summer. He turned the page. I tried to forget it, we all did, but then Luca said it out loud. We should see what's behind it. He meant the door. We all laughed. Nervously. Loudly. Too loud. But Marek was already grinning in that way he did when he had an idea that would end in blood or glory. "Come on, Jakob," he said. "Don't you want to know what they were hiding? What if it's treasure, gold, or Nazi weapons?" I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The pen hesitated again. Jakob's lip curled as he remembered the exact moment Marek turned that key. But that wasn't yet. That was still pages away. Tonight, he could only begin. He closed the book slowly, reverently, and set it down beside the lamp. Outside, the wind howled again. But this time it wasn't the trees. It was the factory. Calling. Chapter 2. The Factory's Shadow. Summer in Grzany was a cruel sort of beautiful. The sun rose early and burned with the relentless heat of something trying to purge the land of its sins. The war had ended 6 years ago, but in our village it never truly left. The trees still bore shrapnel scars. The wells ran with rust, and the earth gave up bones after heavy rains. We were children, though. Teenagers just tall enough to think ourselves invincible, and like all cursed towns, we had our legends. There were 4 of us then. Me, Jakob, quiet, cautious, too bookish for Marek's liking. Luca, the bastard son of a Red Army deserter, always grinning, always angry at something. Anya, the girl who could throw a rock farther than any of us. And Marek, our ringleader, blond, sharp-eyed, and drunk on the myth of danger. His father had died at Stalingrad. His mother drank herself to sleep most nights. We didn't talk about it. Instead, we wandered. We climbed broken statues, played at war among the burnt tanks left rotting in the fields, and dared each other into the woods where the real ghosts lived. And always we circled the factory. It sat at the edge of the forest like a wound that wouldn't heal. Surrounded by barbed wire fences and the remains of guard towers, its gray walls were mottled with black scorch marks and moss. The outer buildings had collapsed in places, exposing rusted piping and twisted beams like ribs. Trees grew where roofs once stood. Crows gathered in flocks and screamed down at us if we came too close. The rumors said the Soviets tried to destroy it, but the heart of the factory, the underground structure, survived, buried, waiting. We all swore not to go inside. It wasn't spoken aloud, just understood. So, of course, Marek suggested it. It started as a stupid dare. Whoever doesn't come to the gate is a coward and has to kiss that toad Anya found. Luca spat. I'd rather die. Anya smirked. He might. The damn thing has more teeth than you. We laughed then. All of us. Even me. We had no idea what waited for us beyond the trees. We pushed through the underbrush around noon, sweat already clinging to our shirts, skin raw from mosquito bites. The sun bled through the trees in jagged shafts, and somewhere distant thunder grumbled. The air grew still the closer we came to the fence. There was no breeze, no birdsong, no insects. Just silence, dense and cloying. The gate was a black iron monstrosity, its hinges sagging and wrapped with chains as thick as our arms. A rusted sign hung from one post, half fallen, reading in faded German, Entree drink, Zutre verboten, Todesgefahr, and the entry, danger of death. Marek kicked the gate and it rattled like bones in a crypt. See? Nothing to be afraid of. Anya frowned. We shouldn't be here. This place. It smells wrong. And it did. Like iron and decay. Like something that had rotted not in flesh, but in time. Still, Marek found a gap where the fence had collapsed under a fallen tree. One by one, we slipped through. Inside, the ground crunched under our feet, not with gravel, but with broken glass and scattered shell casings. A faded red star was still visible on the crumbling walls, and beneath it the ghost of a swastika barely scrubbed away. The factory loomed ahead, its doors gaping like the mouth of a giant. We passed rusted conveyor belts and shattered machinery. Luca poked at a pile of rotting crates, only to recoil when a rat the size of a cat hissed at him and vanished into the shadows. Then we found the stairwell. Pass collapsed. It led downward into darkness. Concrete steps slick with moisture. Walls covered in moss and streaked with some kind of oily black residue. I almost turned back then, almost. But Marek had already lit a stolen oil lantern and started down. The descent felt endless. 20 steps. 50. 100. The air turned cold. Not the kind of cool you expect underground, but icy, like a tomb that had never been opened. The lantern flickered violently near the bottom, casting shadows that danced and leapt like living things. And then we saw it. The door. It sat at the end of the corridor like a god on a throne. Easily 12 feet tall and made of some matte black metal, it was set into the wall with no visible hinges. The surface was covered in deep scratches, some clearly claw marks, others etched symbols none of us recognized. Circles, intersecting triangles, runes that seemed to shift if you looked at them too long. Around the frame, the wall had buckled outward, as though something had tried to push through. And beside it, a rack of keys? 12 of them, arranged in a half-circle above the frame, each hanging from a rusted hook driven into the stone. They were ancient, grotesque things, long, twisted shafts of oxidized metal, each unique. Some were barbed, others had symbols carved into the bow. One had dried blood on the teeth. We didn't speak. Not even Marek. We just stared. The lantern sputtered again, and for a brief second I thought I heard something. A whisper behind the door. A voice like static. Like something dreaming behind iron and rust. Then Luca cursed loudly, and we all jumped. I stepped in something. He held up his foot. A black, viscous smear covered his boot. It smelled like burning hair and bile. I moved the lantern closer. There was a trail of it, that black ooze, seeping from under the door. A crack no thicker than a matchstick, and from it that rot pulsed like a heartbeat. Marek stepped forward. Anya grabbed his arm. "Don't." He shook her off. "Don't be a coward." Later I would wish I had tackled him, hit him, screamed, something. But I didn't. We just stood there, mouths dry, as Marek reached toward the keys. He didn't touch them, not that day. But he stared at them like they were calling to him, like they were made for him. And somewhere behind that door something knocked. Once. Slow and heavy, like a fist the size of a man's torso hitting steel from the other side. The sound rolled through the corridor like thunder trapped in a coffin. We ran. Up the stairs, through the factory, into the trees, hearts pounding, legs shaking. No one looked back. We never spoke of what we saw. But it was too late. The factory had noticed us, and the door had dreams. Chapter 3. The Wrong Turn. It was a week after the first descent. The days in Grozny crawled by, each one heavier than the last. The sun seemed dimmer, the air thicker, as though something had been let loose when we stepped into that stairwell. Even the animals seemed to sense it. Dogs barked at empty corners. Chickens refused to leave their coops, and the crows in the forest gathered in silent murder, watching with glassy black eyes. Marek changed. He spoke less, slept less. The light that used to dance behind his eyes, the mischief, the hunger for chaos, was now replaced by something colder, focused, like he was staring through you instead of at you. He carried a piece of chalk in his pocket, sketching those symbols we'd seen on the door into the dirt, the walls of the schoolhouse, even his skin. I caught him one evening pressing his ear against a rusted drain pipe outside the bakery, eyes closed, smiling. "The door," he whispered, "has a voice. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." I tried to talk him out of it, begged him even, but Marek had made up his mind. The four of us met again that Friday. A mistake. One I will never stop regretting. He told us it was just one more look, a final dare before school started again. Luca protested, but Marek only laughed. "What's the matter?" he grinned. "Afraid of keys?" Anya folded her arms. "You promised, Marek. We swore not to go back." "I didn't swear," he said, lifting his shirt. On his stomach was a fresh carving, one of the door's runes, etched crudely with the tip of a razor blade, blood crusted in the grooves. I was already shaking my head. "You don't even know what they mean." "I don't have to he interrupted. "They want to be used. The keys. They're waiting." He turned away from us then, and we followed. Like fools. The forest was silent as death. Not even the wind stirred. A storm had passed the night before, but the air felt untouched, as if nothing had moved through this place for a century. We crossed the same barbed fence, crawled through the break, and returned to the skeletal remains of the factory. Inside, the darkness felt thicker, hungrier. The walls sweated black streaks, and the ground had begun to crack, small fractures from which oozed more of that oily black fluid, stinking of rot and sulfur. The stairwell still stood. Chunks of concrete had fallen in the week since. Rebar jutted out like rusted ribs, and mold bloomed in slick green patches along the walls. Marek lit the lantern. It sputtered once, twice, then burned to life with a deep, red pawnee glow. We descended in silence. Each step echoed too loudly, like the stairwell was amplifying our presence, alerting something below. I remembered the sound of Anya's breathing too fast, Luca muttering prayers under his breath, and Marek humming that tune we'd all heard faintly behind the door. It wasn't a song, it wasn't music. It was madness translated into sound. And then we reached the bottom. The door hadn't changed, still as massive, still scarred, still pulsing with that awful presence. The keys remained untouched above it, their hooks blackened as if burned. Marek stepped forward without a word. I grabbed his arm. "Don't, please, this isn't a joke anymore." He turned to me, face blank, eyes dark and distant. It never was. He reached up. There were 12 keys, numbered crudely with faded Roman numerals scratched into the base of each hook. He skipped key 5. His hand hovered, then closed around key 3. It looked wrong, like it had grown longer since last week. The shaft bent slightly to one side, and the bow now bore an extra ring, like a collar. "Marek," Anya whispered, "please." But he didn't listen. With childish bravado, he turned to us and grinned. "I just want to see." He stepped forward and slid the key into the hole at the center of the door. It fit. The metal groaned like a beast stirring. And then he turned it. The moment the key clicked into place, everything fractured. It wasn't sound, it wasn't light, it was time, splintering like glass under a hammer. The world twisted. The floor buckled beneath us. Yet we didn't fall. The lantern exploded in a burst of crimson light and froze mid-air, its flames suspended like tongues in a jar of syrup. Anya screamed, but the sound came in slow motion, garbled and warped. Merritt jerked back from the door, or tried to. He didn't make it. His body exploded, not with fire, not with force, but in pieces, sections of him tearing apart as if a giant invisible blade had cut him into ribbons. One leg vanished, clean off below the thigh, blood spraying in slow arcs. His arm twisted backward, bones snapping with sickening cracks, elbow shattering like glass under pressure. His face, God help me, his face peeled, the skin sliding up and over his scalp as if sucked by a vacuum. His mouth stretched wide, a perfect oval of silent agony, teeth fracturing and rising like shattered tombstones. He froze, suspended, 6 feet off the ground, limbs outstretched, flayed, twitching, blood frozen in droplets around him, eyes rolled back. Still alive, still aware. I know he saw us. I know. The door groaned, metal twisting, something beyond it pressing forward like a fetus in the womb. A howl erupted, not from the door but from the walls. Stone shook, screamed. Pipes split open, spraying steam. The runes on the door glowed red-hot, dripping like molten wax. We ran. Remember how? 1 minute we were there, trapped in a frozen hell, and the next we were stumbling up the stairs. Luca dragging Anya, me vomiting down the steps as the howling grew louder. Behind us, the stairwell collapsed, chunks of ceiling crashing down like the wrath of God. We burst out into the factory yard, choking on air, our ears bleeding, the world spinning. And still, behind us, the door hummed, loud, pleased, like something had fed. Chapter 4. Silence of the Screams. The forest devoured their screams. Jakob didn't remember breaking the tree line. One moment he was inside that tomb of rust and blood, lungs filled with hot iron, eyes seared with the image of Merrick's mutilated body, suspended in unnatural silence. The next he was staggering through pine needles, tripping over roots, cold mud soaking through his trousers, his own breath rasping like a saw blade in his throat. Anya was ahead of him, or beside him, it didn't matter. She was screaming. Or maybe she wasn't. Her mouth was open, lips trembling, but no sound came out. Luca followed behind, limping, one hand clamped over his right ear, blood dripping between his fingers. The sky above the forest was a dull gray canvas, stained darker by the trees swaying without wind. The branches clacked together like bones. Somewhere nearby, a raven let out a long, mocking caw, its voice sharp enough to split the fog curling across the underbrush. Jakob tried to speak. But the name came out garbled, not a whisper, not a word, something else. His own voice echoed back to him, distorted, twisted, as though funneled through a broken radio. It bounced off the trees, repeated again and again, each version more warped than the last. Rurek? Grup. Rut. He slapped his hands over his ears. Anya turned to look at him, eyes wide, rimmed in red, and Luca was mumbling prayers that sounded like gibberish. They ran. Or maybe they stumbled. The forest bent around them, trees leaned too close, roots twisted underfoot. The birds above watched in perfect silence now, heads cocked unnaturally to one side. Jakob's legs finally gave out when they reached the edge of the clearing behind Anya's father's barn. He collapsed onto the cold grass and vomited. Bile and mucus clung to his lips. He couldn't stop shaking. The world still echoed. Even there, far from the factory, the noise clung to them, like something had gotten into their heads, a resonance, a frequency. The sound of the door humming, buried in their eardrums, in their teeth, inside their blood. Anya knelt beside him, hands trembling as she tried to touch his face. "We," she choked. "We have to tell—" But again her voice echoed back wrong. Not even language anymore, just twisted notes, like a song played in reverse, guttural and inhuman. They stopped trying. That night, Jakob lay in his bed, eyes wide open, sheets clinging to his sweat-slicked skin. Every creak of the wooden walls felt like a whisper. Every gust of wind against the shutters, a scratching claw. He didn't sleep, but eventually something came. A dream, but not his own. In it, he was back in the stairwell, alone. The air was red, pulsing, wet. The door stood ahead, breathing, yes, breathing, its surface rising and falling with a sick rhythm. The keys hung above it, but they were no longer metal. They were fingers, severed human digits, still twitching. Long nails cracked and bleeding, they swayed gently, as though caught in some unearthly breeze. Then one detached. It fell slowly. Jakob reached out to catch it, and the moment it touched his palm, he felt teeth close around his wrist. He screamed as something behind the door dragged him inward. He woke up choking, hand numb, the taste of iron in his mouth. There, on his nightstand, a key. Rusted, old, not there the night before. He flung it across the room and cried until morning. Over the next few days the village changed. Jakob avoided the others. The three of them were shattered in different ways. Luca had stopped speaking entirely. He just stared, out windows, at walls, at shadows. Anya would flinch at sudden sounds and carried a kitchen knife everywhere, even to the market. She stopped brushing her hair. Her hands constantly trembled. The townspeople noticed. Of course they did. The baker whispered behind his counter. Father Antoni gave them strange glances, always touching the crucifix beneath his robe. Kids stopped playing near their homes. It was as if they were marked. And then the men came. It happened overnight. No announcement. No trucks, no noise. Just black vans, suddenly lining the village's only road. Men in black suits, tall and expressionless, standing in perfect stillness like grave markers. Sunglasses at night, radios clipped to their belts, weapons that didn't look like weapons. Their insignia. SCP. Jakob only caught a glimpse. One man standing beneath the streetlight, face obscured, speaking into a device in a low voice. The next morning, the forest trail was gone. Fences had appeared, tall, electric, humming softly, warning signs in English, Russian, and something unrecognizable. Barriers with strange glyphs carved into them. And soldiers. Or not soldiers. Something colder. They didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched. The factory was sealed. Over the next week, more vans arrived. More strange equipment. Machines Jakob had never seen, humming with lights and cables that stretched into the earth like tendrils. The SCP insignia began appearing on old buildings, on sealed crates, on the new iron doors bolted onto the town hall. Grazzini had been quarantined. No one came in, no one left, and slowly people forgot. Not Jakob, not Luca, not Anya, but the others, the villagers. They began to act as if nothing had happened. Marek's name wasn't mentioned. His home stood abandoned. Windows boarded. His mother taken away, they said, for treatment in the city. No one remembered the screams. The stairwell, the door. But Jakob did, because every night it waited behind his eyes. Every time he blinked, he saw Marek's body in the air, ripped apart, twitching. Still alive, and in the corner of his dreams something whispered, Not in words, not in thoughts. Yas keys, clinking, turning. Chapter 5. Containment Breach. Jakob learned to disappear long before the Foundation came. Even as a boy, he'd known how to blend into shadows, to make his steps silent, his presence forgotten. In a town like Grzyny, crushed under the boot of war, starved by silence, there were only two ways to survive: become invisible or become part of the rot. He chose invisibility. It served him well when the men in black arrived. They moved like surgeons, cold, efficient, precise, every motion calculated, every word clipped and laced with authority. Jakob watched from the rafters of the old granary, hidden beneath a tarp slick with bird droppings and mildew. Through a gap in the rotted slats he saw the trucks roll in, 5 of them, matte black and unmarked. Then came the men, dozens, dressed in tactical armor unlike anything Jakob had ever seen. No flags, no names, only that insignia, stitched into their shoulders and stamped on their crates. SCP. They called it Site 22. A mobile operation hub was established overnight in the field near the factory. Prefabricated buildings sprang up like tumors. Antennas stabbed at the sky, cables snaked across the earth. Humming towers pulsed with low, subsonic rhythms that made Jakob's teeth ache. The SCP Foundation had come to feed, and the factory, it was still hungry. At first, they sealed the perimeter, then the entrances, then the ground itself. He watched from a crawl space as drones were lowered into the stairwell on thick steel cables. They didn't come back, so they sent men, 2-man squads, in thick suits, sealed, pressurized, bristling with sensors and gear. Each carried an identical black case handcuffed to their wrists. Jakob saw one of the cases opened in a rare moment of carelessness. Inside, the keys, 12 of them, now numbered with engraved tags, each held with reverence, like relics or weapons. Men in lab coats, never less than 3, would gather around them and speak in voices too low to hear. Jakob didn't need to hear. He already knew. The door had been uncovered completely. Massive construction equipment stood abandoned around it as though the machines themselves refused to get too close. The stairwell had been reinforced with steel supports and concrete barricades. Still, the rust bled through. No matter how much they scraped, it returned, in rivulets, in smears, in symbols. The door stood untouched until the 3rd week. Then came the experiment. Jakob watched it unfold through the scope of a discarded field monocular, lens cracked but still functional. Rain drizzled from a sky the color of dying ash. Lightning cracked somewhere distant, yet no thunder followed. They brought in a team of 6. 4 were heavily armed. 2 wore lab coats over body armor. The leader carried key. 5. Jakob saw it clearly, etched in stark numerals along the shaft. The correct key. The only key. A thick cable was attached to the team leader's suit. It led back to a massive winch mounted on a truck, flanked by 2 men monitoring readouts and pressure valves. The man inserted the key. It turned smoothly. With a soft hiss of decompression, the door opened. No creak, no screech, just silence. A vacuum sucking the light out of the air. Behind it, darkness. Not the absence of light, but something thicker, tangible, like the shadows were waiting to breathe. The team stepped inside. Minutes passed. Then 10, then 20. The cable remained slack. The monitors read stable pressure, then fluctuated wildly. The digital readouts scrolled through symbols Jakob didn't recognize, flickering red. One screen went black, then green, then filled with static that coalesced briefly into a screaming face. One of the technicians fainted. The others began to panic. And then the cable jerked. But The wench screamed, metal shrieked, alarms blared, and something was pulled back through the doorway. Not the team. Not all of them. Just one. The team leader, Jakob thought, but it was hard to tell. His suit had been half melted, the visor shattered, his face a ruin of blackened flesh and torn muscle. His mouth hung open in a soundless scream, jaw unhinged, tongue ragged and twitching. His eyes were gone. Sucked out, not gouged, not burned, just absent as if they'd never existed. Blood streamed from empty sockets in thin floating ribbons. His body twitched. Bent at wrong angles. The joints had been reversed, arms bending backwards, knees twisted like corkscrews. And still he screamed. No sound came, but the scream echoed in every mind nearby. Jakob felt it vibrate through his skull. It shattered the birdsong, made the earth tremble. The man's body convulsed, once, twice, then exploded. Not violently, not with gore, with a blinding flash of white that seared through retinas and painted shadows into the dirt. It lasted less than a second, and when it faded, all that remained was ash. A fine gray dust blowing gently in the breeze. The door closed on its own. The key ejected with a soft clink. It lay on the concrete, still warm. No one moved to touch it. In the days that followed, rumors spread even among the silent personnel. Jakob, ever watching, ever hiding, listened in the dark corners of supply tents, behind storage crates, under crawl spaces. He pieced together fragments. SCP-004, that was the designation. Temporal anomalies, reality dilation inside the threshold, time compression fields, non-Euclidean spatial behavior. One file, accidentally left behind, half-burned, contained a photograph. It showed a figure, distorted and floating mid-air, limbs splayed, a grotesque mockery of human anatomy stretched thin as a spider's web. Malik. Jakob's stomach heaved. Another page described time displacement. Exposure for longer than 120 seconds resulted in biological and temporal fragmentation. Some subjects returned from beyond the threshold, having aged decades. Others never returned at all. There were mentions of a second door, deeper, hidden, alive, and warnings. Never use keys 1 through 4. Never turn the door clockwise. Never answer the knock. Jakob stopped reading. He took the half-burnt file. He memorized it. Then he destroyed it. But still the key appeared. Sometimes in his pocket. Sometimes on his pillow. Always key 3. The one Marek turned. The one that screamed. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Town. The disappearances began subtly, like a sickness settling over Krasinski. At first it was easy to explain. An old man wandered off into the woods and never returned. A girl failed to show up to the market. Her mother swore she'd left only minutes earlier. A farmhand didn't come home after feeding the goats, his boots later found in a puddle of water that steamed despite the morning frost. People whispered of wolves, of vagrants, of Soviet soldiers returning under cover of night. They clung to familiar fears because the truth was too large to grasp. But Jakob knew, and so did Luka. And Anya. She had always known. The Foundation's perimeter widened with each passing week, fences crawling outward like a slow-spreading infection. Men in black began patrolling the village square, not talking, not buying, not living, just watching. Their eyes hidden behind dark lenses, their weapons always in sight. New signs appeared, bold, red metallic placards that buzzed faintly with some unknown energy. The villagers couldn't read them, but the message was clear enough. Don't enter. Jakob once saw a dog chase a rabbit toward the forest. Only the rabbit came out. The dog's corpse was found 2 days later in the church basement. Dehydrated, its skin blistered and peeling like overcooked meat. The priest buried it quietly. That Sunday, no one attended Mass. Not even Father Antoni. He had vanished too. Anya was the first of them to go. It was in the middle of the night. Jakob heard the knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Measured, hollow, wrong. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening as his mother's footsteps creaked across the floor. Her voice whispered a greeting, confused, then fell silent. The door never opened. It didn't need to. Jakob ran to the window, breath fogging the glass. Outside stood Anya. She wore her nightdress, dirt-stained and torn. Her bare feet left bloody prints on the frostbitten grass. Her arms hung limp by her sides, and her mouth moved without sound. Her eyes, they were wide, too wide. Not screaming, but pleading. Screaming came later. Jakob threw on his coat and burst outside, but by the time he reached the porch, she was gone. No footprints. Just rust. A fine dusting of orange flakes scattered like snow across the steps. That was the last time anyone saw Anya. Luca changed. After that, he stopped speaking entirely. He would sit on the roof of the granary, staring toward the factory with his father's old binoculars for hours at a time, unmoving. He refused food, shaved his head, began carving symbols into his arms, those same symbols, the runes from the door. Jakob begged him to stop. We don't understand what they mean. I don't care, Luca rasped. His voice was cracked from disuse, barely more than breath. She's not gone. I hear her. Every night. She's screaming under the dirt. Jakob grabbed him by the collar. You go near that place and you'll die too. Luca didn't flinch. He smiled. Then, I'll be with her. The night Luca left, the sky turned a sick shade of green. It wasn't a storm. Not really. No wind, no thunder. Just a pulsing glow behind the clouds, like an aurora birthed from the mouth of a dying god. Jakob waited. He stood at the tree line, a lantern in hand, hoping, praying that Luca would come stumbling back, muttering curses, half drunk and full of grief. He never did. What came instead was a scream. That a human one, not entirely. It tore across the hills like a jagged saw, thick with static, pitched too high to belong to any living throat. It rattled windows, burst light bulbs, and made 3 children bleed from their ears. Jakob dropped the lantern. Its flame went out. The next morning the guards were doubled. That week 5 more villagers vanished. Jakob kept count. By mid-month, 37 were gone. Some disappeared in daylight, simply walked out their doors and never came back. Others were found crumpled in their beds, their bodies scorched from the inside, burnt beyond recognition but cold to the touch. Their nails, when present, were lined with rust. Not dirt. Rust. The authorities said nothing. The Foundation said less. Only once did Jakob dare approach the new fence alone. He kept low, hidden beneath an overgrown hedge, heart pounding so loud it threatened to give him away. Beyond the electric barrier, trucks moved like funeral processions. Each one carried something covered by heavy black tarps, bulky, unmoving, and vaguely human-shaped. One of them twitched. The soldiers didn't react. As Jakob watched, a tall figure emerged from one of the prefab bunkers. Not a soldier. A scientist. Female, tall, gaunt, her lab coat black instead of white, eyes glassy and sunken. She walked to the edge of the door, whispered something into the intercom, and vanished inside. The door closed behind her with a hiss that sounded too much like a sigh. Jakob turned and ran. That night, the door came to him in his dreams. It no longer needed to knock. It simply opened. He saw Anya, standing just beyond the threshold, her eyes torn from her skull, weeping rust. Her mouth moved in slow motion. Behind her, Luca crawled, legs bent the wrong way, arms dragging like broken tools. And Marek, still floating, still twitching, still alive. Jakob woke up screaming, blood trickling from his ears. His bedsheets were soaked, not in sweat, but rust. Chapter 7. Sealed Histories. The road to the truth was paved in blood and rust. Jakob was nearly 80 now, but his bones hadn't grown brittle, only colder. The tremble in his hands was not age, but memory. Memory of screams without sound, of rust falling from the sky like snow, of the boy whose smile shattered into ribbons of flesh in a single breath. The Foundation had long since abandoned Grziny. At least, that's what they wanted people to believe. The village was now a corpse town, buried beneath state-classified silence. No maps marked it anymore. The road in had been closed due to geological instability, a lie wrapped in barbed wire and satellite blind zones, but Jakob still knew the way. The old SCP archive was half buried beneath what had once been the village schoolhouse. They had gutted it during containment, installed blast doors behind chalkboards, retinal scanners in place of light switches. But the technology had aged, like everything else. Power had died, circuits had corroded, the door still stood, heavy and inert. But time had peeled the rust away in strips, like dried flesh from bone. Jakob forced the emergency hatch open with a crowbar. The groan that came from the wall wasn't mechanical. It was organic, tired, pained. He stepped inside, flashlight clutched in gloved hands, its narrow beam cutting a swath through the darkness. Dust thick enough to choke clung to the air. Mold grew in streaks down the concrete walls, and the ceiling dripped with condensation that tasted faintly of copper when it hit his tongue. He descended slowly. The stairs were cracked, some crumbling under his weight, and below, the archives waited like a frozen morgue. Metal shelves lined the narrow halls, tipped over, ravaged by time. File folders sprawled like corpses, each folder stamped with an SCP designation. Redacted names, ink-smudged photographs. Blood. Actual blood, dried and black, marring the pages. Jakob sifted through them, one after another. SCP-017, burned. SCP-231, sealed in a vacuum container. SCP torn in half, both paper and manila folder. Then finally, /004. The folder was bound in leather, unlike the rest. Locked with a simple clasp, no digital chip, no scanner. Just an old-fashioned padlock that clicked open with a rusted key Jakob had carried since the night Anya vanished. Inside, the pages were crisp. Too crisp, untouched by mold or time. The ink was sharp, almost too black, as if printed just yesterday. He began to read, each line burning into his mind like scripture. SCP-004. Object Class: Euclid. Reclassified from Safe, pending further review. Description: SCP-004 consists of a large anomalous steel door, SCP-0041, and 12 keys, SCP-00413. When a correct key, currently identified as SCP-0047, is used to unlock SCP-0041, the door opens to an interior space not consistent with its external geometry. All other keys result in catastrophic failure events upon use. Recorded effects include temporal dismemberment, compression inversion, biological stasis, and psychological evisceration. Entities have been observed beyond the threshold, humanoid in general shape, multiple limbs, no visible eyes, not bound by linear movement. Jakob's breath caught in his throat. He turned the page. Incident 4. Subject: Mary. Event date: /8/1951. Result: Exposure to SCP-0043 resulted in complete biotemporal fragmentation. Subject was disassembled at a molecular level and frozen in an anomalous stasis field within 0023 seconds of key engagement. Status: active. Stasis remains uninterrupted as of /// Photograph attached. Full attention visual. Cognitive Hohauser. Jakub hesitated, then slowly pulled out the photo beneath the report. It was grainy, black and white, possibly from early surveillance film. At first glance, the image was just static. Then it resolved. Merrick, or what was left of him, he floated 6 feet above the concrete floor, suspended mid-air, arms splayed wide, legs torn from the torso, yet still attached somehow, threaded by sinew and impossibility. His mouth hung open in a frozen scream. His eyes, his eyes, were wide and locked forward, pupils dilated to the size of coins, staring through the camera. He hadn't aged. He was still 14, still wearing that stupid t-shirt with the cartoon skeleton, still twitching, still alive. In the corner of the photo, handwritten in pencil, subject conscious, attempts to communicate ongoing, no response. Eyes track movement. Jakub dropped the photo. It fluttered to the ground like a broken bird. He stumbled back, hand to his mouth, bile rising. It hadn't been a nightmare, not a trauma-induced fantasy from a childhood tragedy. Merrick had never died. He had been trapped, in time, in that moment, for decades, screaming in silence. Jakub tore deeper into the archive. Dozens of documents, some too redacted to decipher, others filled with language that bordered on madness, mentions of chrono-entities, extratemporal drift, echo loops that devoured memory and identity. One file, stamped Level 5 for eyes only, was little more than a manifesto. They do not open the door for us. They open it to feed. We are the meat, the time blood, the sacrifice made across dimensions. The keys are not tools. They are lures. We have fed them for centuries. Jakub couldn't breathe. He had come for truth. But truth, like the door, demanded a price. As he turned to leave, the emergency lighting flickered, long dead, now twitching back to life. The intercom above him hissed. A voice crackled through. It was his own, but wrong. Distorted, like he was hearing it spoken from behind a wall of water, each word broken, gasping. Jakub, you shouldn't have opened this. The lights died again. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Slow, wet, and from somewhere deep in the archive, a key clicked into a lock. The door, even buried beneath concrete and steel, had heard him, and it was awake again. Chapter 8. Whispers from the Door. Jakub stopped sleeping. Not because he wanted to. His body, ancient and exhausted, begged for it. His bones cracked like old furniture when he stood. His eyes stung and twitched. His heart skipped beats like it was already practicing its final rhythm. But each time he closed his eyes, the door waited. Not in a dream, not in memory, in presence. It whispered, not in language, not at first. The sounds came like breath over a blade, dry, thin, metallic. They slithered down the walls of his home at night, crawling into his ears with the rustling hush of keys brushing together. Dumb, bright, clink, clink. By the second week, it learned his name. Jakub. Voice like shattered glass whispering through water. He called, "Finish what you started." He boarded the windows, burned the files he had stolen from the archive, poured holy water over the photo of Marek until the ink bled and ran, but even soaked in flame, the image refused to burn. His home, what little sanctuary he had left, began to change. It started with the kitchen. One morning he entered to find it pristine, clean, restored. The walls were no longer yellowed with mildew and time, but fresh, whitewashed, lined with hand-painted blue flowers. His mother's wallpaper, gone since 1956. The kettle hissed on the stove, steaming. He approached it cautiously, hand shaking as he reached out and stopped. As his reflection in the chrome was not that of an old man. It was a boy of 15. His hand unwrinkled, fingers unscarred, face wide-eyed and pale, caught in a moment that no longer existed. He backed away and the kettle screamed, boiling over, hissing like a snake. The wallpaper peeled before his eyes, curling, blackening, the flowers bleeding blue down the walls like tears. Then came the hallway. Sometimes, as he passed it, it would stretch. Literally stretch, the walls pulling away from each other as though the house were breathing, groaning. The lights would flicker, and in those strobing flashes, he saw versions of it. The hallway as it was in 1971, with his wife's crucifix still hanging over the door, as it looked in 1943 when soldiers had stomped through it in muddy boots. As it had never been, lined with unfamiliar doors, all numbered in Roman numerals. He once reached for the knob on door 3, only for it to vanish beneath his hand like smoke. And always, always he heard them, the keys, whispering. Each had a voice, different, personal. Key 3, Merrick's key, spoke the loudest. Its voice was his voice, high and cocky, the same tone Merrick used when they found the door that first day. Mocking, daring. You ran, Jakob. You ran and left me. He screamed back. Threw chairs at the walls, smashed mirrors, pulled the power meter out of the wall with bare hands. The house stayed silent until night. And then it began again. Then the keys arrived. The first appeared in the mailbox, wrapped in a black velvet cloth. No return address, no note. It was key 1. He knew without touching it. It was shorter than the others, jagged at the tip, as though it had been broken off inside something. The teeth were worn smooth by time or mouths. He buried it in the yard. The next morning, it was on his pillow. Key 4 arrived the following night, laid carefully across the threshold of his front door, positioned so he'd have to step over it to leave. He kicked it into the bushes. It appeared under his tongue while he was brushing his teeth. He gagged, blood and bristles spraying from his mouth as he coughed it into the sink. It rang against the porcelain like a funeral bell. The rest followed. Keys 2 slid out of his fireplace one morning, still glowing red. Hot. Key 9 was found inside a loaf of bread he hadn't bought. Key 12. He woke with key 12 embedded in his forearm. Buried to the hilt beneath his skin. No blood, no wound, just the solid, agonizing presence of metal fused with bone. He screamed for hours, tried to cut it out, failed, had twitched under his skin when he neared the door to the cellar. The cellar, the original entrance to the factory. The foundation had sealed it decades ago, concrete poured thick, reinforced with steel plates, glyphs etched in protective circles across the floor. But now, that seal was cracking. Hairline fractures spread like veins in a dying eye. Rust bled from them. And through it all, the whisper continued, "You've seen what lies behind time. You've heard the song. You know the way." Every object in the house, every book, picture frame, drawer, began to vibrate softly when he passed, like the world recognized him as something no longer human. He watched himself age and unage in mirrors, skin folding and unfolding, years passing in seconds. He saw a version of himself with no eyes, then one with 3. His reflection smiled when he didn't. one night, he found his younger self sitting at the table. No words. Just the boy version of him, quiet, dirty, dressed in the same shirt he wore the day Merrick died. Jakob blinked, and the boy was gone, but the chair still rocked gently. He could take no more. The house was no longer a house. It was a memory machine, a distortion of reality. Rooms changed their shape depending on the time of day. Light came from sources that weren't there. And below it all, below everything, the door pulsed. He felt it in the floor. The low, wet beat of something alive, pressing upward. The keys called to it, cried for it, screamed with it. They wanted to be turned. They wanted to be fed. Jakob knew what he had to do. Because now he heard a new whisper, not from the door, from inside the house. The whisper with Anya's voice. Soft, spoken. Please, let us out. And from deeper still, Merrick's voice. Faint, frozen. Jakob, please, I don't want to scream any more. He wept until dawn. Then he went to the cellar. Chapter 9. The Final Key. The road to the factory was no longer a path. It was a wound, split open through the forest, where no bird sang and the trees twisted away from the sky as if recoiling from what festered beneath. Jakob walked it alone, shoulders hunched beneath his coat, boots crunching over frost that crackled like breaking bones. He did not bring food, water, or hope. Only the key. Key 5. It had appeared in his pocket 3 nights ago. No envelope, no explanation, just weight and intent. Smooth and cold, made of something darker than iron, it pulsed in his hand like it remembered being inside the door. He gripped it now with fingers stiff and pale, knuckles white with cold and dread. Ahead, the ruins loomed, the factory's husk, devoured by time but never truly dead. Its twisted skeleton stood half swallowed by earth and rust. The barbed fence had long since fallen, coiled in heaps like sloughed skin. The stairwell still gaped, throat-like, a black mouth in the crumbled floor. The air changed as he neared. Thicker, heavier. Time lost meaning here. His watch stopped ticking. His breath fogged in slow motion, each exhale dragging seconds longer than the last. Gravity felt inconsistent, as if reality had started to sag, folding around the structure like wet paper. The whispers came back. Dozens of voices, all familiar. Merrick, Anya, Luca, but also others. The soldiers, the scientists, the countless unnamed victims pulled beyond the door. Their pleas overlapped, wept, laughed, begged. The voices did not come from the stairwell. They came from inside Jakob's head. He descended with careful steps. The staircase was a shattered spiral of rebar and concrete, water dripping from above, each droplet falling too slow, too heavy, as though time itself resented its motion. The tunnel below was lined with rust. The walls throbbed slightly, warm to the touch. Organic. He reached the chamber, and there it was. The door. SCP-0041. Still sailed. Still vast. Still hungry. It had changed. The scratches and claw marks were deeper now, jagged as if made by something far more desperate. The runes carved around the frame bled light, red, violet, and an impossible shade of green that burned the eyes. The keys still hung above, each one vibrating slightly, whining at a frequency just below hearing. All except one. Key 5. Jakob stepped forward. The ground pulsed beneath him. Every beat aligned with his heart. He raised the key and the voices screamed. Yeah, you're too late. Let us out. We are waiting. We remember you. He ignored them. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. No resistance. The metal felt warm, familiar. He turned it. Right, clockwise. The door shuddered, groaned, then opened. There was no hallway, no chamber, no threshold, only void. Endless, starless, dimensionless. The light, if it could be called that, was wrong. It came from all directions and none, bending in ways that defied physics, like reality had given up trying to understand this place. The ground beneath Jakob vanished. He was falling, into rising, and floating. All at once, he moved forward, though his feet didn't touch anything. Gravity unmade itself. Shapes twisted in the distance, spires of bone-like crystal, spirals of dead languages etched in the air, eyes that opened and closed in slow succession. And then he saw them, suspended in space, their bodies torn and stitched by time and geometry. Marek, still 14, still mid-screen, his torso hovered 5 feet from his legs, his right hand flayed into a lattice of fingers that reached out, flexing toward Jakob, but never quite able to move. His eyes turned. They saw him. Jakob choked on his breath. Marek's jaw opened wider. Wider. Too wide. No sound. Just an expression of agony, stretched across forever. To his left, Anya drifted. Her body was whole, but wrong. Her limbs looped in on themselves, her skin flickering between ages, child, teen, corpse, child, teen, corpse. Her mouth moved, repeatedly, the same sentence. Please, I'm not supposed to be here. Then Luca. He was crouched, arms wrapped around his legs, back turned. Jakob moved closer, time breaking around him like glass. Luca? The boy turned. His face was gone. Not torn, not erased, just not there. A smooth patch of skin where features should be, stretching wide in a faceless scream. The void trembled. Shapes stirred beyond the limits of perception. Watchers, tall, thin, limbs like liquid wires, heads bulbous with eyes, hundreds of them, rotating slowly, blinking asynchronously. They were watching the broken children, watching Jakob, watching through him. You brought us meat, they whispered. Jakob stepped back. Marek's hand twitched again, reaching. Anya's form flickered faster. Luca's scream became a soundless hum that vibrated the bones of the void. And the door behind Jakob began to close. The watchers glided forward. No. Jakob rasped. No. He turned, tried to run, but there was no ground. No air. No escape. He floated past his shoulder. Key 3, Marek's. It spun in the air once, and then twisted. The void shattered. A scream tore through everything, a true scream. Marek's final voice, unleashed from decades of silence, so loud it burned. Jakob was flung backward, ripped from the void, thrown through the doorway, and into darkness. Chapter 10. The last entry. The journal was found in the mud. Its leather cover, cracked and curled with moisture, was half submerged at the base of the ruined stairwell, where SCP-004's containment structure once stood. The entry inside was written in frantic script, lines growing more erratic with each sentence, ink blotting and spidering like blood spreading through tissue. The last few pages are now catalogued in the Foundation's restricted archives, sealed under multiple cognitohazard warnings. The following transcription has been declassified for internal review only. September 17th, 20 a.m. 3:14 a.m. I saw them. I saw what lies beyond time. Not death, not void, something else, something older. They are the architects of the fracture, the keepers of the threshold. They watch the door, not to keep us out, but to trap what's inside. Marek, Anya, Luca, still alive, still suffering. Their minds twisted into loops, their bodies frozen in screaming. There is no end in that place. Only the moment before pain, held open like a wound that never closes. They knew I would return. They have always known. Every key has a will. They dream in rust. They sing in the static between seconds. I thought I was coming to rescue them. I was the offering. The door wants me now, not to kill, to contain. It feeds not on flesh, but on continuity, on identity. I can feel myself unraveling. Thoughts bleed together. My memories no longer align. I can feel a version of myself that never left the factory in 1951 scratching at the edges of me. I remember Marek's blood on my face before he died. But now I also remember watching him die yesterday. I remember Anya's hand in mine when we fled. But I also remember her pulling me back inside. Time is breaking me apart. I don't know which version of me is writing this. I don't know if I ever left. They said the keys choose who turns them. I didn't turn the door. The door turned me. I can hear them calling now. I see them outside the walls. Their eyes open like windows. They're whispering. They're whispering. They're whispering. Let us in. The entry ends mid-sentence. The final word is cut by a long slash across the page, ink trailing downward in a jagged arc, smearing violently across the parchment like a sudden jolt or spasm. The handwriting vanishes after that. Foundation Incident Report, SCP-004, Event Recovery Brief. Time of retrieval, 5:23 a.m. Location, Grzini Site, 22. Recovered materials: 1 journal, Class I anomalous, 1 analog camera, damaged, scorched fragments of clothing, no human remains. The door was found sealed, fully intact, undisturbed, yet the protective containment sigils had been burned off, as if cauterized with heat from inside. Around the door, flesh had grown, not human, not animal, but biological, pulsing and membranous, embedded with rust flakes and twitching tendrils, samples taken for analysis. Near the threshold, agents discovered a shattered camera. Inside, 1 roll of film remained intact, developed under controlled conditions. The final image: a blurred figure, an old man, frozen mid-magnet, caught in the act of turning the key. His face is contorted in absolute horror, lips peeled back over teeth, eyes wide and rolled up, every wrinkle pulled tight as though gravity itself had become hostile. Around him, time distorts, his form fractured into overlapping silhouettes. A dozen versions of himself layered together, all moving at once in different directions. Then behind him the door is half open, and from the crack something looks out. Not a creature, not a shape, just a presence, a gaze, like a mirror held up to the void. That photo has since been sealed in the Level 5 archive, along with the journal. All personnel involved in the retrieval operation have been relocated or reassigned, following mandatory amnestic therapy. The town of Grzini no longer exists. Satellite images show only forest. The records have been erased, but the door remains, waiting, and sometimes, on certain nights, when the wind blows from the east and the shadows stretch long across the earth, it is said you can hear the faint clinking of keys